The cold metal floor of the archive station echoed with Marcus Vale's footsteps as he walked through the empty corridors. 300 years had passed since the Great Silence began, but Marcus had no idea what that meant. He was just looking for old trade route maps, nothing more. Marcus worked as an ambassador for the Altarian Collective, a peaceful group of worlds that traded goods across the galaxy. His job was simple: find safe paths for merchant ships to travel between stars. But the computer system kept showing gaps in the historical records, empty spaces where trade routes should have been. The archive room was dusty and forgotten. Most people used modern databases now, but Marcus needed the oldest records he could find. His fingers moved across the ancient control panel until he found what he was looking for: files from 3 centuries ago. The first few files were normal. Ship manifests, cargo lists, fuel costs. But then Marcus found something strange. A file marked with symbols he had never seen before. When he tried to open it, a warning message appeared in 17 different languages. Restricted. Council Authority Level 9. Access forbidden. Marcus looked around the empty room. No one was watching. He had Level 7 clearance, which should have been enough for old trade records. But his curiosity was stronger than his caution. He typed in his access code. The file opened slowly, as if the computer was reluctant to show him what was inside. What Marcus saw made him lean forward in his chair, squinting at the strange text on the screen. The documents talked about something called Classification 47, or the Extinct Aggressors. But they were not normal military reports. These files described weapons that turned entire planets into glass. They showed pictures of star systems that were completely empty, with nothing but dead rocks floating around dying suns. Marcus read about battles where one side fought so violently that their enemies stopped trying to win and started trying to just survive. The reports described ships that would crash into enemy vessels on purpose, even when they still had working weapons. They told stories of soldiers who kept fighting even when they were dying. But the strangest part was that Classification 47 had won every single battle. Every one. So why were they called extinct? Marcus called his assistant, Sarah Knox, to come look at what he had found. Sarah was young and smart, and she knew more about galactic history than most people twice her age. "This does not make sense," Sarah said as she read over his shoulder. "If they won the war, why do the files say they are gone?" Marcus pointed to another document on the screen. It was an official order from the Galactic Council, dated exactly 300 years ago. By unanimous vote, all records of Classification 47 are now forbidden. Their name, their culture, their history, everything must be sealed away. The galaxy must forget what it learned. Sarah frowned. What did the galaxy learn? And who taught them? Marcus scrolled through more files. He found reports written by different alien species, all describing the same enemy. The Zentari called them the Grief-Mad Ones. The Altarians called them the Silence Bringers. The Vaktar used a word that roughly translated to the ones who fight like dying stars. Every report said the same thing. Classification 47 did not fight like other species. Most wars in the galaxy were about territory or resources or pride. Species would attack each other, capture some planets, negotiate a peace treaty, and go back to normal life. But Classification 47 fought differently. They fought like they had nothing left to lose. When they attacked a planet, they did not try to capture it. They tried to end it completely. When their enemies took one of their worlds, they would destroy 10 enemy worlds in response. The reports described weapons that no one had ever seen before. Bombs that could crack a planet in half. Ships that could make stars burn out faster. Worst of all, they had something called Scorched Void protocols. If they could not win a battle, they would destroy everything in the area so that no one could win. Marcus found a video file buried deep in the archives. The image quality was poor, but he could see a massive space battle. On one side were the familiar ships of the Galactic Council, sleek, efficient vessels that fought with careful precision. On the other side were ships that looked different. They were built like weapons, all sharp angles and heavy armor. But it was not the ships that made Marcus feel cold. It was how they fought. The unknown ships did not retreat when they were damaged. They did not surrender when they were outnumbered. They crashed into enemy vessels like missiles, even when their own weapons were still working. The audio was mostly static, but Marcus could hear voices speaking in a language he did not recognize. The tone was not angry or hateful. It sounded sad. It sounded like people who were crying while they fought. Sarah pointed to the timestamp on the video. Look at the date. This battle happened right before the Great Silence began. Marcus stared at the screen. The winning ships in the video belonged to Classification 47. But according to all official records, they had disappeared immediately after their victory. Sarah, Marcus said quietly, what kind of species wins a war and then vanishes from history? Sarah was reading another document. Her face was pale. Marcus, look at this. It says here that Classification 47 requested the memory wipe themselves. After they won the war, they asked the galaxy to forget their name. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Why would anyone do that? The answer was in the final document he found. It was written in the same unknown language as the battle recordings, but someone had added a rough translation below. We became the monsters we fought against. We saved the galaxy by destroying everything that threatened it, including ourselves. Let our name die with our sins. Let the silence teach what our voices could not. Marcus closed the files and sat back in his chair. The archive room seemed colder now, filled with the weight of forgotten history. Somewhere in the darkness of space, the descendants of Classification 47 might still exist. Or they might all be gone, leaving only empty worlds and sealed records. But one thing was clear. The galaxy was peaceful now because someone had paid a terrible price for that peace. And they had paid it so completely that they chose to erase themselves from history rather than be remembered for what they had to become. The silence between the stars suddenly felt much heavier. Dr. Emma Cross floated in her spacesuit outside the abandoned Kepler station, running her scanner along the massive metal walls. The station was huge, bigger than most cities, but it had been empty for 300 years. The official record said everyone left because of dangerous radiation from a nearby star, but Emma knew that was a lie. Emma was the galaxy's best expert on old alien ruins and abandoned places. She had spent months studying Kepler station, and what she found did not match the official story at all. The metal walls were damaged, but not by radiation. They were damaged by weapons. Marcus Vale had contacted Emma after finding those mysterious files in the archive. He floated beside her now, watching as she took readings from the station's hull. His assistant Sarah Knox waited inside their ship, monitoring their communication. Look at these blast patterns, Emma said, pointing her scanner at deep scars in the metal. These were not made by any weapon I know. And see how the metal looks? It is not just broken. It looks afraid. Marcus examined the scanner readings on his helmet display. The metal showed stress patterns that seemed impossible. It was as if the walls themselves had been terrified when they were damaged. Emma led Marcus through a hole in the station's side, into the dark corridors within. Their helmet lights cut through the darkness as they floated toward the center of the station. Emma had been working here for months, slowly uncovering the station's secrets. The strangest thing is not the damage, Emma said as they moved through empty hallways. The strangest thing is what happened after the damage. Someone tried to repair this place, but they did it wrong on purpose. Marcus looked at the walls around them. In some places, he could see where holes had been patched with metal, but the patches were made with the wrong materials. They would not hold for long. Why would someone fix something badly on purpose? Emma stopped at a large door marked with warning symbols. Because they wanted it to fail. They wanted this place to die slowly. Behind the door was the station's central archive room. Banks of computers lined the walls, most of them dark and broken. But Emma had managed to get some of them working again. She had found something that made Marcus understand why the station had been abandoned. Watch this, Emma said, activating a holographic display in the center of the room. The hologram showed a space battle, but not like any Marcus had seen before. On one side were ships from many different species, the familiar designs of the Galactic Council fleet. They fought in formation, using standard tactics, trying to disable enemy ships without destroying them completely. On the other side were ships that Marcus recognized from the archive files. The vessels of Classification 47. But seeing them move in battle was different from looking at still pictures. These ships fought like living things that were in terrible pain. See how they attack. Emma pointed at the unknown ships. They are not trying to capture anything. They are trying to end everything. The ships moved in ways that made no sense tactically. They would ram into enemy vessels even when their weapons were still working. When their hulls were torn open and atmosphere was bleeding into space, they kept fighting. Some ships continued to fire their weapons even as they broke apart. Marcus watched in horror as one of the unknown ships, badly damaged and leaking fire, accelerated directly at a much larger council vessel. The collision destroyed both ships in a ball of light that made the recording flicker. This is not military strategy, Marcus said quietly. This is something else. Emma nodded grimly. I brought a friend to help me understand what we are seeing. He should be here soon. A few minutes later, James Carter arrived at the archive room. James was a former military officer who had studied every major battle in galactic history. He was calm and professional, but when Emma showed him the recording, his face went pale. I have seen thousands of battle recordings, James said slowly. Species fight for territory, for resources, for honor, for revenge. But these ships, they are fighting like they have already lost everything that matters to them. Emma restarted the recording and pointed to specific details. Look at their weapons. They have technology that could capture enemy ships intact. But instead, they use weapons designed to completely destroy everything they hit. The recording showed weapons that turned enemy ships into clouds of glowing dust. Other weapons seemed to make ships simply disappear, leaving only empty space behind. But here is the strangest part, Emma continued. She advanced the recording to near the end of the battle. Listen to this. The audio was mostly static and interference, but underneath the noise, they could hear voices. The language was unknown, but the emotion was clear. Someone was speaking over the communication channels, and they sounded like they were crying. James listened carefully to the voices. That is not the sound of victory. That is the sound of people who are heartbroken. Emma enhanced the audio as much as possible. The voices became clearer, though the words were still incomprehensible. But the tone was unmistakable. Grief. Deep, terrible sadness. They are winning this battle, Marcus observed, watching the tactical display. Their ships are destroying the Council fleet. So why do they sound so sad? The recording ended abruptly, but not before showing something that made all three researchers step back from the hologram. In the final moments, as the last Council ships retreated, one of the unknown vessels began broadcasting on all frequencies. The message was short, and Emma's translation computer could only provide a rough approximation of what it meant. Forgive us. We have become what we swore to destroy. The children will not remember our names. The archive room fell silent except for the hum of the old computers. Emma, Marcus, and James stared at the empty hologram projector, each trying to understand what they had witnessed. They won the battle, James said finally. But they hated themselves for how they won it. Emma looked at her scanner readings from the station's hull. And afterward, they came here and made sure this place would slowly fall apart. They wanted the evidence of their victory to disappear. Marcus thought about the files he had found, sealed away and forgotten. They did not just want the evidence to disappear. They wanted themselves to disappear too. The three researchers floated in the darkness of the abandoned station, surrounded by the echoes of a war so terrible that even the winners wanted to forget it had ever happened. Captain Robert Hayes stood on the bridge of his exploration ship, the New Dawn, staring at the impossible sight before him. The Omega sector spread out in front of them like a graveyard of worlds. Dozens of planets orbited dead stars, but these were not normal dead worlds. Their surfaces gleamed like mirrors, reflecting the faint light of dying suns. Robert had been exploring space for 20 years, but he had never seen anything like this. Every planet in the entire sector looked like it had been turned into glass. Perfect, smooth glass that covered entire continents. Captain, said Lieutenant Grace Miller from her science station, these readings make no sense. The planets were not destroyed by weapons or asteroids. Someone did this on purpose. Grace was the ship's science officer, young but brilliant. She had been studying the sensor data for hours, and her face showed confusion and growing horror. Dr. Thomas Reed, the expedition's historian, floated over to look at Grace's readings. Thomas was old and had studied every major war in galactic history. He had come on this mission because Marcus Vale had asked him to investigate the Omega sector's connection to Classification 47. The atmospheric readings are impossible, Grace continued. These worlds were not just attacked. They were sacrificed. Someone turned their own planets into funeral pyres. Thomas pulled up his historical database and compared it with their current location. I think I know what happened here. These were Classification 47's home worlds. Robert turned from the main screen to stare at Thomas. You are saying they did this to themselves? Thomas highlighted star systems on the ship's holographic display. Look at the pattern. Every world in this sector was rendered uninhabitable at exactly the same time. According to the timeline Marcus Vale provided, this happened right after Classification 47 achieved total victory in their war against the galaxy. Grace ran more scans of the nearest planet. Captain, I am detecting structures on the surface. They are not ruins from before the glassing. These were built after the planet died. Robert made the decision to take a landing party down to investigate. He, Grace, and Thomas took a shuttle down to the glass world below. As they descended through the thin atmosphere, they could see the structures Grace had detected. Massive towers rose from the crystallized surface, all of them perfectly preserved in the airless environment. The shuttle landed with a soft thud on the glass ground. The three explorers put on their environmental suits and stepped outside. The surface felt solid under their feet, but Robert could see down through layers of glass to what had once been cities and forests, all frozen in crystal forever. The monuments were enormous, each one taller than the biggest buildings Robert had ever seen. As they walked closer, they could see that every surface was covered with writing. The same strange symbols from the archive files covered every wall, every pillar, every surface they could see. "These are not victory monuments," Thomas said quietly as he activated his translation device. The computer could only provide rough guesses about what the writing meant, but even the approximations were disturbing. The symbols seemed to be names. Millions and millions of names, carved into every available surface. Names in the same unknown language, but organized in careful lists and columns that suggested great importance. Thomas moved his scanner along one wall, reading the translation attempts. These appear to be memorial inscriptions. But there are so many names. Grace was scanning a different monument with her scientific equipment. "Captain, according to my readings, there are over 4 billion individual names carved into these structures. And that is just on this one planet." Robert felt a cold feeling in his stomach. 4 billion names? That is more than the entire population of most worlds. They walked deeper into the monument complex, passing wall after wall of names. The writing was beautiful, each symbol carved with perfect precision. Someone had spent incredible amounts of time and effort creating these memorials. At the center of the largest monument, they found something different. A single inscription, much larger than the others, written in symbols that seemed to glow faintly in their helmet lights. Thomas focused his translation device on the central inscription. The computer worked for several minutes before providing a rough approximation. "We became what we fought against. The enemy was us. May the silence teach what our voices could not." Grace took readings from the glowing symbols. "These are not just carved into the stone. They are made from a different material entirely. Some kind of crystallized organic matter." "Organic?" Robert asked. "You mean?" "I think these symbols are made from the ashes of the people whose names are written here," Grace said quietly. Thomas was scanning other parts of the monument with growing understanding. "Captain, I do not think these are memorials for their war dead. I think these are memorials for everyone they killed in the war. Including their enemies." Robert stared at the billions of names surrounding them. "You mean they memorialized the people they fought against?" "Not just their enemies," Thomas said, his voice barely a whisper. "Look at the organization of the names. These sections here are marked differently. I think they are their own people too." The three explorers stood in silence, surrounded by monuments to an entire galaxy's worth of death. The glass world stretched endlessly around them, reflecting their lights back like a broken mirror. Grace made another disturbing discovery. "Captain, my scans show that there are hundreds of these monument complexes on this planet alone. And we detected similar structures on every other world in this sector." Robert tried to imagine the scope of what they were seeing. An entire species had turned their home worlds into memorials, then somehow crystallized their planets to preserve them forever. "They won their war," Thomas said slowly. "They achieved complete victory. Then they came home and built monuments to everyone who died in that victory. Including themselves." "But why?" Grace asked. Thomas looked at the central inscription again. "Because they realized what they had become. They won by being more terrible than their enemies ever were. And when they looked at what they had done, they could not live with it." Robert stood on the glass surface of a dead world, surrounded by the preserved ashes of billions of beings, and finally understood the true cost of total victory. Classification 47 had not disappeared because they were defeated. They had disappeared because they could not bear to exist after winning so completely. The silence between the stars was not empty. It was full of grief. Dr. Lisa Morgan stared at her computer screen in the Galactic Council's Biological Research Center, unable to believe what she was seeing. For weeks, she had been analyzing genetic samples from different species across the galaxy as part of a routine medical study. But the patterns she discovered were anything but routine. Lisa called to her supervisor across the laboratory. "Director Phillips, you need to see this right now." Director William Phillips was a careful man who had spent 30 years studying alien biology. He rarely got excited about anything, but when he saw Lisa's data, his eyes widened with shock. These genetic markers, he said slowly, they are showing up in 17 different species across 42 star systems. But that is scientifically impossible. These species evolved on completely different worlds, millions of years apart. Lisa pulled up her analysis on the main display. That is what I thought too. But look closer. These are not natural evolutionary changes. Someone deliberately put these genetic sequences into different species' DNA. The modifications are so perfectly integrated that they look completely natural. Philip studied the data more carefully. The genetic modifications were incredibly subtle, woven into each species' natural genetic code so smoothly that they appeared to have always been there. Only Lisa's advanced scanning techniques had revealed them as artificial additions. But who could do something like this? Phillips asked. And why would they want to modify so many different species? Lisa highlighted specific genetic sequences on the display. Look at what these modifications actually do. They all relate to the same things: better problem solving, increased empathy, improved ability to resolve conflicts peacefully. Someone was literally breeding peace into the galaxy. Before Phillips could respond, they were interrupted by visitors. Marcus Vale entered the laboratory, now holding the rank of senior ambassador after his discoveries about Classification 47. With him was a woman who introduced herself simply as Helen Brooks, calling herself a cultural consultant. Dr. Morgan, Helen said calmly, your research is approaching dangerous territory. Phillips stepped protectively in front of his equipment. Are you here to shut down our research? Helen smiled, but there was sadness in her expression. I am here to help you understand what you have found. The genetic modifications you have discovered are not random experiments. They are a legacy, a final gift from Classification 47. Marcus activated a portable holographic display he had brought with him. We have been tracking unusual patterns in galactic politics for the past decade. Every major war that should have happened in the last 3 centuries was prevented. Not by council intervention, but by anonymous peacekeepers who appear, solve the problem, then disappear. The hologram showed a map of the galaxy with hundreds of small incidents marked in different colors. Territorial disputes that ended in trade agreements instead of wars. Resource conflicts that turned into cooperative mining operations. Border tensions that dissolved into cultural exchange programs. In every case, Marcus continued, the solutions appeared suddenly, usually proposed by individuals who had no official authority but somehow convinced everyone involved to compromise. Helen nodded. The species you call Classification 47 did not go extinct. They scattered across the galaxy. They changed themselves. They became guardians instead of warriors. Lisa looked at her genetic data with new understanding. You are saying they are still alive? Living among us? Not among you, Helen said quietly. As you. My great-grandmother was one of them. She modified her own genetics to blend with the Altarian population, as did the ancestors of roughly 12% of the galaxy's current population. The laboratory fell completely silent. Philip stared at Helen with growing amazement. You mean, you are one of them? Helen pulled up her sleeve and pressed a small device against her arm. A drop of blood appeared, which she placed on Lisa's genetic analyzer. Within moments, the results appeared on the main screen. The genetic markers were there, but they were different from the others Lisa had found. Stronger. More complex. More recently modified. My people could not undo what they had done during the war, Helen explained. But they could ensure it never happened again. They spread across the galaxy, integrated with other species, and dedicated their lives to preventing conflicts before they could escalate. Marcus showed them more data from his investigations. We found evidence of this network operating in every major galactic crisis of the past 3 centuries. They work as diplomats, teachers, traders, even maintenance workers. All ordinary jobs that let them be in the right place at the right time to stop wars before they start. Phillips examined Helen's genetic profile more closely. These modifications are incredibly advanced. Your people altered themselves at the cellular level to blend perfectly with other species. It was not easy, Helen said. Many of the first generation died during the genetic modifications. Others went insane from the psychological changes required to suppress their warrior instincts. But enough survived to establish the network. Lisa pulled up her galaxy-wide analysis again. So all these genetic modifications I found, they are your people's descendants. Helen nodded. Children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren of Classification 47, all carrying genetic modifications that make them naturally inclined toward peace instead of war. They do not even know their true heritage. They just feel compelled to help resolve conflicts. Marcus showed them surveillance footage from recent diplomatic missions. We identified dozens of peace negotiations where key breakthroughs came from suggestions made by seemingly random advisors or translators or even janitors. All of them carried the genetic markers Lisa discovered. The network does not rule anything, Helen explained. We have no government, no official authority. We just guide. When we see conflict starting, we send people to help find peaceful solutions. Most of the time, the people involved never realize they are being helped. Phillips looked at the genetic data with new respect. So the galaxy's 300 years of relative peace is maintained by the children of the ones who learn the true cost of total war, Helen finished. We work in shadows, prevent conflicts before they explode, and bear the burden of remembering what our ancestors became, so no one else ever has to experience it. Lisa stared at her computer screen, realizing that her routine medical research had uncovered the galaxy's greatest secret. Classification 47 had not vanished, they had transformed themselves into the galaxy's conscience, invisible and unnamed, but always watching and always working to keep the peace their ancestors had bought with such a terrible price. The emergency alarm echoed through the Galactic Council chambers as urgent news reached the core worlds. The Vorthan Empire had conquered 15 star systems in just 2 months, using tactics that reminded many older species of something they preferred to forget. Their ships moved with ruthless efficiency, leaving no survivors and taking no prisoners. Ambassador Marcus Vale sat in the observation gallery, watching as representatives from hundreds of worlds debated what to do about the Vorthan threat. Some called for immediate military action. Others wanted to try diplomatic solutions. Most seemed paralyzed by fear, remembering stories their grandparents told about the last time the galaxy faced such aggressive expansion. 3 levels below the council chambers, in a small maintenance office, David Clark received a message on his personal communication device. The message was simple, just a series of numbers that meant nothing to most people. But David understood. He set down his cleaning equipment and quietly left the building. David looked like an ordinary maintenance worker. He had lived on the capital world for 8 years, doing basic repair work and keeping to himself. His neighbors thought he was just another human immigrant trying to make a living. They had no idea that his genetic code carried modifications that had been carefully planned 3 centuries ago. Across the galaxy, similar messages reached hundreds of other people. Anna Wright was teaching children on a colony world when her device beeped softly. Michael Stone was loading cargo on a freight ship when his communication came through. Rebecca Foster was researching new medicines in her laboratory when she received her signal. All of them looked completely ordinary. All of them stopped what they were doing and began to move. Within hours, strange events started happening throughout Vorthan space. A supply convoy carrying weapons to the front lines suddenly lost all power to their engines. The ships drifted helplessly in space, unable to restart their systems. The Vorthan engineers could find nothing wrong with the engines, but they simply would not work. On the Vorthan homeworld, a group of independent journalists published a detailed investigation into war crimes committed by Vorthan forces. The report included video evidence, survivor testimonies, and internal military communications that should have been impossible to obtain. The story spread across the galactic news networks faster than Vorthan censors could stop it. Most importantly, several key Vorthan commanders began receiving anonymous messages containing detailed intelligence about planned rebellions in their newly conquered territories. The messages warned of specific dates, locations, and tactics that the rebels were planning to use. The Vorthan military leadership faced a terrible choice. They could continue their expansion and risk facing uprisings on every world they had conquered, or they could pull back and try to consolidate their gains peacefully. In the council chambers, senior diplomat Helen Brooks stepped forward to address the assembly. Helen had spent the last decade working as a cultural consultant, helping to resolve disputes between different species. Most council members knew her as a skilled negotiator, but none knew her true heritage. Honored representatives, Helen said calmly, I have received communications from the Vorthan leadership. They are prepared to enter into peace negotiations. The council chambers erupted in surprised chatter. The Vorthans had shown no interest in peace talks just hours before. What had changed their minds so suddenly? Helen continued speaking. The Vorthan Empire is willing to withdraw from 8 of the 15 systems they have conquered in exchange for guaranteed trading rights and technological exchanges. They propose to transform their remaining conquered territories into economic partnerships rather than occupied zones. Ambassador Marcus Vale watched from the gallery with growing understanding. He had spent years documenting Helen's network, and now he was seeing it in action. The sudden engine failures, the leaked intelligence, the perfectly timed revelations, all of it was coordinated to give the Vorthans a face-saving way to end their expansion without admitting defeat. The peace negotiations took 3 days. Helen worked tirelessly, moving between different delegations, finding compromises that satisfied everyone involved. The final agreement was so carefully balanced that both the Vorthans and their former enemies claimed victory. The Vorthan Empire agreed to return most of their conquered worlds in exchange for beneficial trade agreements. They would keep 3 systems as legitimate colonies, but only after the inhabitants voted to join them voluntarily. Most surprisingly, the Vorthans agreed to share their advanced military technology with the Council in exchange for access to medical and agricultural innovations. When the agreement was signed, representatives from across the galaxy celebrated the peaceful resolution. But Marcus Vale noticed something others missed. Throughout the negotiations, Helen had been quietly coordinating with people who seemed to have no official connection to the peace talks. A maintenance worker who serviced the communication systems. A translator who worked with the Vorthan delegation. A security guard who monitored the meeting rooms. A food service worker who prepared meals for the negotiators. All of them carried out small tasks that seemed unimportant but somehow helped move the negotiations forward. Later, in Helen's private office, she showed Marcus a holographic display of galactic conflict statistics covering 3 centuries. The data showed wars prevented, genocides averted, and peace agreements successfully negotiated. Every major conflict that should have destroyed millions of lives, Helen said quietly, all ended before they could truly begin. The network does not rule anything. We guide. We suggest. We create opportunities for peace. Marcus studied the data with amazement. How many people are in your network? Enough, Helen replied. Scattered through every species, every profession, every world. We are teachers and mechanics, doctors and janitors, pilots and farmers. We live normal lives, but when conflicts arise, we act. She looked out at the stars beyond her office window. We learned that absolute victory leads to absolute corruption. So we chose absolute responsibility instead. We cannot undo what our ancestors did, but we can ensure it never happens again. Marcus thought about David Clark, who had returned to his maintenance work as if nothing had happened. About Anna Wright, back to teaching her students. About all the ordinary people living ordinary lives while secretly protecting the galaxy from itself. The galaxy whispers your old name because some lessons echo across time, Marcus said. Helen nodded. We were erased not as punishment, but as redemption. And in that silence, we found who we were truly meant to be. The war that never was had ended in peace, protected by guardians whose names would never be known.